Good morning, everyone. I am Mark Field, and it gives me great pleasure to be hosting today's session on behalf of Messe Frankfurt UK and Automechanica Birmingham. Welcome to you all. This session, kindly sponsored by ecommotors, is the second webinar in the Automotive Aftermarket series for Messe Frankfurt UK and follows our first successful launch back in July. Digitalisation has been an emerging trend for some time, but the impact for the last few months has placed a stronger focus on how we can adapt our business to a new way of working. It is fitting, therefore, that the title of today's session is Digitalisation, Accelerating the Recovery of the Aftermarket. Before I introduce our guests, I need to cover some brief housekeeping. Today's webinar will be recorded. If you have technical difficulties seeing the screen or accessing audio, please be advised that the best browsers to use are Google Chrome or Firefox. There is technical support online at support.goto.com/webinar. We will take an hour today, which will involve 45 minutes for discussions, and then we'll have some polls, and we'll also have 15 minutes for a Q&A at the end. Please use the chat function throughout to ask your questions, and we'll endeavour to answer them all in the discussion or towards the end of the discussion. Today, we are joined by Dr. Julia Saini, Associate Partner of Frost & Sullivan, Peter Lawton, Senior Section Manager for SMMT, and Andrew Rowson, Co-Founder and Head of Services at ecommotors. We will be discussing how digitalisation has fundamentally changed how businesses are run in the aftermarket. What are the obstacles and factors on which we can affect our businesses to adapt? Our industry speakers will uncover trends and discuss the impact about how we can accelerate the recovery in our trade. So if we're all ready, let's begin. First of all, I'd like to give the speakers the opportunity to properly introduce themselves. So Julia, if I can start with you, please.
Thank you very much, Mark. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Julia Saini, and I head the Global Automotive Aftermarket and Retail Program Area at Frost & Sullivan. I'm currently based out of Dubai, where I also head our consulting practice for the Middle East and South Asia. I'm very looking forward to our discussion today. Thank you, Mark.
Excellent. And Peter?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm Peter Lawton. I work at SMMT, Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, for the last 6 years or so, but been extolling and promoting the value of the aftermarket for 22 years or so. SMMT's got about 230 aftermarket members, so our second biggest group of members. So very much part of our work.
Welcome, Peter. And Andrew, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, great. So my name's Andrew Rowson. I'm head of services over at ecommotors. We're a total end-to-end solution advising aftermarket brands and manufacturers how to embrace multi-channel and digital and strategy in that area. Me personally, I've worked with e-commerce and the automotive trade for around 20 years, headed a company that was the top seller for parts and accessories on eBay at the turn of 2010. And I spend my time consulting with brands manufacturers in both the US and the UK on strategy, how to embrace digital.
Excellent, thank you. That was a brilliant introduction from all three of you. Before we start, we're going to kick off with a poll, which hopefully you'll see on your screen. And this is the first of our polls, and it is a question for everybody. Has your business invested in new digital technologies? Please feel free to take the poll. The results are coming in. What I'd like to do is move to yourself now, Julia, and run through a presentation, if that's okay. Just before we do start.
Absolutely. I can't see. Yeah.
Just before we do start, we asked the question, obviously in that poll, we will give the results now. Has your business invested in new technologies in 2020? And to let you know, Julia, that 70% of respondents said yes, that they had, or their business had invested in new digital technologies. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of our very well-informed audience.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So yes, it's good, because if everybody was saying, hey, what's digital, then I'm not sure how we would have run this. So again, thank you very much for joining us today. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our panel discussion and to provide you with a global overview of how we at Frost & Sullivan view the impact COVID has had on the automotive aftermarket, and how this has driven digitization and potentially also new opportunities for us. Now, if you could change to the next slide, please, Mark. Perfect. So at Frost & Sullivan, we have been doing a lot of analysis around the forces that shape the automotive industry, and the forces that really over the past half year have defined what we now call the new normal, both in our personal and in our professional lives. So there are some common themes and lifestyle changes that we're seeing across different markets worldwide. So the year 2020 has really brought a whole new set of dynamics, and both the automotive industry and the aftermarket have not really been immune to these. So we have governments releasing stimulus packages or actually intervene with ad hoc regulations. Our mobility requirements have really changed, and well, like it or not, our Amazon bills have gone up, at least mine has. So there are definitely different factors influencing our lives and the way we do business, and bringing us on a trajectory we did not necessarily anticipate a year back. So if we go to the next slide, we can see that all of us have really witnessed the major implications the pandemic had on the automotive aftermarket. And although really not as severe as on the actual retail of vehicles, and this is something I work with a lot as well, we did not see an impact. For example, we did see an impact on our driving behavior, or actually the non-driving behavior that we had during lockdown. So less kilometer driven had a negative impact on the requirement of maintenance parts and lubricants. There was a lower demand on breakdown parts, and with actually the dramatic drop in number of accidents, there was obviously a lower demand for collision parts. And as we all know, garages need their base to be utilized at 80 to 90% of capacity. Only then they start making money. And during COVID, utilization rates at garages have gone down dramatically. And but then conversely, as we see later, digitization and collaboration with service aggregators turn out to be vital for the survival of garages in terms of catching business through these new channels, and especially for those who did not necessarily have an established online presence. If we move on to the next slide, we see some of the key trends and opportunities emerging in the aftermarket. So I think today I would really like to focus on the opportunities that digitization and COVID have brought to us. So COVID has turned out to be a catalyst for many in terms of digitization. It has digitized the automotive industry and the aftermarket, further pushing business models that, yes, of course, we had them before. There's nothing really radically new, but these did not necessarily receive sufficient focus and investments pre-COVID. In the parts and accessory business, global revenues are expected to reach about $75 billion US, and that's the value of the parts transacted online, purely B2C. And digitization is definitely not limited to the parts retailing space. It's also facilitating the service side of the business. It includes the online service aggregators, the marketplaces, which allow customers to actually identify garages and book services, make their appointments. And there are really numerous players emerging in this space. And based on our detailed research, we believe that by end of 2025, close to $6 billion US worth of service jobs will be booked through these new platforms digitally online worldwide. Another opportunity that we have identified at the start of this year revolves around the on-demand vehicle service models. Now, these include your services like fuel delivery, repair services, and some of them even providing car wash services. So with the increasing reluctance to visit workshops and the fear of contamination, it is expected that more and more customers will actually opt for such solutions as in terms of safety and convenience. Lastly, we've seen rising demand for hygiene car care market, like improved cabin air filters, already one of the most popular categories in the aftermarket, without even mentioning the virus filtration technologies, purification solutions, and vehicle sanitization. So we really see an increased focus around health, wellness, and well-being. And within the aftermarket, we expect this trend to generate over $2 billion by 2025. So as you can see, we believe that the aftermarket definitely has the potential to emerge, showing resilience, shifting the way it does business, and engaging and investing in digitization elements and new business models. Now, if we go to the first big opportunity really quickly, in the aftermarket, it's all around digitization of the parts and the accessory business. As just mentioned, our estimates at Frost & Sullivan suggest that in 2020, close to 40 billion worth of parts and accessories will be sold online worldwide. Whilst adoption is overall increasing, with key markets being the US, China, and Germany, this obviously happens at different paces and different levels, as we can see on the slide. So some markets might just digitize selected channels. In some others, there might be the prevalence of marketplaces or the emergence of new digital business models. So increased activities on digital platforms. So if we have a look at the couple of past months, so April to July, so I think we need to move on to the next slide. Sorry, I'm struggling a little bit with the video. Thank you. No. So 1 second. Sorry, I can't see the slides. Opportunity. No. The overization. So sorry. Can you go one slide back? I do apologize. So actually, if we look. If we look at the last couple of months, so April to July, on the next slide, there has been an increase in digital touch points. So some of the names that you see on the top half are online parts and accessory sellers. The ones on the bottom are your on-demand service providers, so the service marketplaces. So clearly you see that there has been a huge uptake, anywhere between 60 to as high as 200% in some cases. So yes, digitization has played a role in supporting growth, but of course, as you can say, a lot of markets have opened up at the beginning of July, and that we see regular customers actually coming back, being it online or offline. So this, of course, contributes to the entire picture. But there are still specific models like the Click Mechanic, the Your Mechanic, which are specific on-demand service providers where mechanics come and service the car at your place of choice. So COVID has for sure focused our attention as customers and drivers towards the solutions. And this again contributes to the overall health of the aftermarket. So if I don't want to go and see the mechanic at the garage, but I need a service, he will come to my place of choice, which in return counteracts a potential loss in revenues in the aftermarket. So digitization and connectivity are also reshaping the entire process of vehicle servicing, with traditional players and new entrants using different digital tools and online platforms to capture demand and provide access. So in future, services will become more dynamic, more intuitive, more predictive, with greater connectivity. So within the ecosystem, online service marketplaces have developed at a particularly fast pace, with OpenBay in the US, Auto Butler in Europe, and Who Can Fix My Car in the UK, just to really name a few. So some of these platforms offer broker services. They are mediators between service partners and online customers, relying on an established and certified network of garages for the customer to choose from. Others, such as Karubi, for example, follow an e-servicing model where the company takes full responsibility of the entire service contract, selecting both the garage that is expected to do the job, but also procuring directly the parts that are potentially required. So whilst the broker service is still one of the most common models, it is easy to understand why the e-servicing model, especially for its potential to drive the parts business, is particularly interesting for the market players. So I'm looking now at the on-demand model, so thank you. So a subset of the online marketplaces I just explained about is the on-demand service model. So as I said, there are more and more consumers now looking to get their vehicle service done at their choice of location, be it fuel delivery, car washing services, oil and tire services. So the beauty of the solution is the variety of names that we have in the business. In the USA, we have Spiffy, and they had an investment from Shell. We have Repair Smith with an investment from Daimler, or Kenska, which is far as India, and they also service two-wheelers. So the reason I'm bringing this up, due to COVID, customers have really become more accustomed to these solutions, and we do expect there will be a shift in customer expectation towards more and more contactless solutions, where both safety and convenience are really the king for us. And this is a new area of opportunity for the aftermarket. And backing from some of the big names we've just seen clearly underlines the long-term appetite for these solutions from the customer base. If you change to the next slide. Now, as mentioned earlier, generally, if you look at our lives, our awareness and focus on health, wellness and well-being has increased significantly since the beginning of the pandemic. We use sanitizers, masks, gloves. We sing happy birthday when we wash our hands over and over again. And I'm sure that being in the aftermarket, every one of us has noticed that a certain product features have received far more emphasis in terms of marketing. So although a lot of these products are really commoditized products, especially around sanitization and disinfection, who would have actually thought of selling them as automotive or mobility related products? So there are opportunities for smaller players to remarket and rebrand some of these solutions and push them as health, wellness and wellness products. So even for smallers, or just as we have seen from the bigger ones like MAN and Hummel going for cabin air filters, or Magneti Marelli rebranding actually an existing product into an ozone generator. So to conclude, before opening our discussion, and not to leave COVID as the last word, in the bigger picture, we see four major long-term disruptors bringing news to the aftermarket. One of them is definitely from a case perspective. So how vehicles will be more connected, automated, shared, and electrified. And it's all about how these vehicles itself are changing. And the second one is more coming from outside, from the disruption from new entrants that are joining the aftermarket very, very strongly. So the likes of Amazon, eBay, the service marketplaces, the online marketplaces, everything is shaking up the market in the dynamics as we've known them for many, many years and decades. Now, the third area of disruption is really how the vehicle ownership is changing and how the goalpost from targeting the end user from an aftermarket perspective is changing within. So how the shift is towards vehicle management rather than the vehicle ownership that reflects even in the aftermarket. And all of these changes are linked to our common theme today of digitization. And digitization generates data, which eventually can be monetized. So in the future, the aftermarket should be looking at solutions that do not just focus on repairing the car, but also on solutions that help managing the car and us as a customer throughout the entire customer journey, regardless of car ownership or really of car usership. And with that, I would like to pass back to my colleagues and to Mark for our panel discussion.
Thank you, Julia. That was absolutely fascinating and presents a number of challenges, opportunities that we can look forward to in the future. Andrew, if I can kick off with you first on the panel discussion. Julia has shown, obviously, there has been a massive, dramatic increase in opportunities through digitalisation. Could you build on that for us? Could you just give me some examples that you've seen where you've, if you take into account what Julia said at the very end with some of the bigger players getting involved, have you seen other examples of businesses doing very similar?
Absolutely. So things were increasing before the pandemic in respects of sales online and both service and parts. But this has just escalated things this year. So with the clients that we work with, we've seen a 40% increase towards the end of Q1 compared to same time last year. That's leveled off a little bit as people are getting used to how things are working. People are getting back to work, although that's changing again in the UK, as we can see. But they are up around about 25 to 30% across the year, and that won't go away. There's no doubt about that. People who didn't buy online are now used to buying online because they were forced to buy online during the pandemic, and they're not going to stop that habit. And it's not just buying, it's also influencing. They reckon around about 80% of all parts bought are influenced by B2C, influenced or purchased online. So that doesn't necessarily mean they've actually purchased them on a marketplace. That means they've researched it and then gone into a bricks and mortar establishment in order to fulfill the end sale. But then also we've seen an increase in social media. You know, people have had lots of times on their hands, yeah. And if you think people have been using Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest and all those good sites before the pandemic, well, that usage has increased in double digits. And again, these all influencing the market.
Thank you. I think you make a great point, particularly around the influencer. When you talk about 80% of products purchased are born about from influencers. Peter, just to bring you in, what practical steps or immediate steps can the market take to realise the benefits of digital?
I think the critical first step is to recognise that demands have changed. That's whether you're looking at an end user, you know, someone driving the car, or workshops for factors, you know, that relationship has changed. And as Julia and Andrew have said, I think COVID's just seen that an uptick in that. So recognising that change is here is nothing new. In fact, Julia helped us with our aftermarket report, and digitalisation was part of that, 2017. But it's accelerated. People want convenience. They want something easy to do. And I think that can be married to efficiency for the sector as well. It's not just a one-way street, I think. So communicating with customers about that, you know, reaching out to them digitally, allowing them to book online, find a slot in your workshop online, allowing them to order parts easily, digitally, and measuring that activity, you know, whether it's the relationship between yourself as a workshop and your factor, or as a workshop and your customer, you know, looking at what activity they've had with you before. So, you know, triaging cars, looking at past experiencing, looking at advisories at the last MOT, things like that, keeping a record of those and using those to really stream efficiency. And that will make the customer experience better too. You know, like I say, a two-way street, I hope, win-win. And although it's obviously important to recognize that digital is critical going forward, there's always going to be a physical element to the aftermarket. You know, we can't change a timing belt online. You have to actually get the parts. You actually have to touch the car. So, you know, with COVID in mind, there's a lot of processes. Julia touched on the cleansing and those sort of elements, and they're really important. And SMMT have provided guidance for the aftermarket and how to assure stakeholders, government, that we're able to do it safely. and assure customers that we're able to do it safely too. So digital, critical, but we'll never get rid of the physical completely.
And Julia, Andrew had said that the upsurge in digital had not reached its peak, but had almost leveled with movement of people going back to work. And obviously Peter had just mentioned that actually digital is here to stay. Are there any chances that we could swing the pendulum back in towards more traditional, or are businesses and people seeing the benefits that digital brings in their daily lives, in their businesses, and it will have to be a part of their future?
Look, I think Andrew and Peter made some very, very valid point, and it drives around the concept that clearly the pandemic has brought us all sort of closer to these digital channels that already existed, that maybe we were not that accustomed to. And so there's a high awareness, a high adoption rate. The million-dollar question is really, as you suggested, is that is digitization here to stay really? What is fancy and what is substance behind the noise that we hear? And I think the crux is really always what is the value to the customer that digitally really brings. So and it's not really, it's not a black and white, because there are no radically new business models, but there has been a strengthening of existing business models. And the value will also be in ensuring that the customer is served properly within the aftermarket, something that Peter and his organization is looking after. And we will always have challenges. And I think Andrew suggested a little bit with knowing data and understanding data. We will need to respect it to our delivery window. We need to still have supply and logistics challenges, because there will always be the physicality of the element. So there needs to be an accuracy to the catalog. There need to be return policies. So unless the digital and the physical channel marry in this way, as I said, we can't change a belt digitally. So it will be, I think, working together, and digital will stay only the moment it will bring value, because the moment, hopefully, pandemic and this enforced removal of the physical will go, who will actually stay digital.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your very thorough responses there. We're going to move to a quick poll now before I get to my second round of questions. And the poll is, if you'd like to take part, does the industry need to upskill to embrace digitalisation? So I'll give you a few seconds to answer those. And the results are that 91% of respondents do think that the industry needs to upskill to embrace digitalisation. Not perhaps surprising there, but Andrew, if I can start with you when we go to this next round of questions. For all businesses in our industry, you will require time, energy, resource, money, and skills from what we've just seen to embrace digitalisation. So how easy is it for businesses to set up, to manage, to really get a foothold? And is that against the backdrop of fear that they're competing with perhaps bigger players? So I guess my main question is, how easy is it for businesses to embrace digital?
So the first point I'd make is, as we've seen the shift, it's not when, it's I've got to actually embrace it, because we're seeing this change being made. And people have been forced even more how they've changed their buying patterns, because they can't go into their fast fit or can't go into the motor factors because they've been closed during the COVID situation. And we don't know whether that's going to be up and down over the next few years. So embracing digital is a number of different factors. And the key to that is data, and the data of how you're indexing that, your parts, if you're selling parts or you're presenting your service. And the data is got to embrace the journey of where the end result is going to be. And the end result is the consumer. So the consumer purchases in a different way than a motor factor or a B2B business. And you need to get your data ready in order to do that. And it's not, you know, it's not hard task. You just need to understand the end point and work your way back and fill the gap in from that. And there's companies like us that help with that. And there's also a lot of information out there in order to help you embrace that. Also, a good way of doing that is through things such as marketplaces that already have their customer base there. So you're tapping into around about 14 to 16 million people buying on eBay in the UK every month, a car part. And you're not having to go and publicize yourself out there, because you just need to make sure your data is optimized on those channels so people can find your parts on there. And there's always a concern as well about conflict of different channels, particularly with brands and manufacturers. But if you look at categories such as technology, they're great at embracing channels. So Apple and Samsung, you know, they'll sell direct to the public, they'll sell through their retailers, they'll sell to the trade customers, and they have their data formatted for all the different elements of that customer journey. And they don't see a depreciation of their sales on those different channels, because they do embrace that, and they understand that actually ultimately it's the end consumer using their products. So they need to get their data geared towards the end consumer. One final thing I just want to add, and touch on what Julia said, is about logistics. And you know, particularly a lot of the aftermarket are distressed purchases. You know, people don't keep a spare set of brake discs on their shelf just in case. They have to buy them because they need them. And that's where it's important, where the logistics and getting those, servicing that customer pretty fast, whether that's serving directly to the consumer or serving you know, B2B in that respect. So that doesn't change at all.
Okay, thank you. And Peter, based on what Andrew has said, coming at it from a skills perspective, what do you think the industry needs to do?
Yeah, before I touch on that, I recognise, you know, activity in the aftermarket was very depressed in April and May, but there was never a requirement for workshops or factors to shut. They were considered a service that could remain open. It's not a job you can do from home, so you can carry on doing it. But yeah, about half did close temporarily. Thankfully, that's seen a recovery as people are moving about more. I mean, traffic levels got down to about 25%. They're 100% now, as Mark, you know, from your journey on the M25 this morning.
Oh yes.
Yeah, so it's really important to know that the sector has remained, you know, supporting essential workers and people who had essential journeys to do slightly different things that they are. Skills, yeah. What does the sector need to do? I mean, the really obvious answer to this is train, and that might sound like a bit of a no-brainer answer, but it's putting an importance on that, and it's factoring that into your future. You know, placing an importance on it, and you know, when you look to the future, I guess next April and May, we may expect to see another dip in activity in the aftermarket as the 6 months extensions come back around, and that's going to happen, you know, for a few years now. So managing that demand and finding other things to do, maybe that's a good time to train. Bearing in mind supply and demand for that might make that difficult, and we're working with DVSA to try and, you know, even out the peak and the trough on that as much as possible. So it's looking to allocate staff to that as well, placing an importance amongst your staff, identifying whether those people exist in your business, and if they don't, trying to attract them. As Andrew says, tapping into the resources that are already there. Julia mentioned Who Can Fix My Car, but factors have got programs to support workshops. Trading groups have got programs to support factors. Full disclosure, the Motor Ombudsman, a wholly owned subsidiary of SMMT, is another mechanism you can use to get yourself online and connect to customers digitally. So that's very important. Overall, skills has had a very difficult time in automotive and other sectors. You know, attracting new people, training them up with new skills and retaining them has never been easy. And that's why it's a key part of SMMT's input on a comprehensive spending review. Specifically, we reference digitalisation and, of course, electrification, but and we're urging government to overhaul apprenticeship schemes that they've not worked to date. They're not accessed properly by small, medium, or large businesses. So a lot of work needs to be done there to really root skills in lots of sectors and really support the economy in doing that. Not just automotive, obviously we're all automotive, so that, but other sectors too.
Thank you. And Andrew, anything you want to add to that from what Peter has said there?
Absolutely. I totally agree with what Peter's saying with regards to the skills and pivoting with regards to moving. And the automotive trade has been through this. You look at the evolution of a car. 50 years ago, it was 2 cables going from a switch to a bulb. Now, with the CAN bus system and how the car's been digitalized, we've had to embrace that as we've moved, and the same with online. So I've got no doubt that the industry will embrace that. It's just being on that journey.
Brilliant, thank you. We're going to ask another question now, if that's okay, another poll for our audience. And this will be that looking ahead to 2021, will you increase your spend on digital products and services? So if you don't mind, I will give you a couple of seconds to answer that question while I think about my journey on the M25 on the way back. I think we're good to go. So in answer to the question, looking ahead to 2021, will you increase your spend on digital products and services? 95% of people said yes. So that is a overwhelming show of intent. And Julia, if I can come to you first, on one of your last slides was future vehicles will not be repaired but managed, and I like that. And there's obviously, the pandemic has accelerated our move towards digital. Is there any way that there are barriers in place that could stop its growth? Is there examples where digital possibly has slowed down? But I think what I'm actually getting at is when you talk about repaired and not repaired but managed, just take us through that process if you can.
Yeah, sure. So I think also the show of intent of your last poll, I think underlines again the fact that digital is here and digital is here to stay. But you see, in the customer journey, there are different touch points that digital has, and it's not easy managing the whole online offline customer journey, and this should be looked at, and that's why we're talking about management in a broader scale. We need to look at the whole customer journey from when the vehicle is being purchased throughout the usage phase to when the vehicle comes back as used vehicle or the user becomes a new vehicle purchaser. So it's incredibly important for the aftermarket to actually look after this target group in the usage phase. So once the vehicle is on the road through the different case technologies. So these are different digital touch points, which I think are particularly challenging also for the independent aftermarket to tap into, because obviously the OEMs and the dealerships are much closer to the pulse at that point. And this ties a little bit back in also the responsibility that the aftermarket has and the aftermarket players in investing into upskilling technicians and the next generation into these an understanding of the digital touch point. So definitely digital is here to stay. It's not black and white. There are different touch points of the journey that we really need to look into, Mark.
Thank you. And Andrew, Julia mentioned those services, those digital touch points. Does digitalisation mean the arrival? We talked about it in conferences in years gone by, but does it mean the arrival of big household names that we've become familiar with coming into our industry, into the automotive aftermarket?
I think it's all about having a platform that already have that customer base and then selling. You know, we're all used to upselling. Once we've got that customer, we upsell. And these are what these platforms do. And, you know, typical examples of that is Tesco's and Sainsbury's going into banking. They've got the customer base. Who'd have thought they would go into that industry? And they outsourced it as well to the Royal Bank of Scotland in order to deliver that on Virgin Money. We're seeing that, and you see marketplaces putting their toe in the water, such as Amazon doing trials with fast fit tires. You've also got Asda outsource. They've got a Asda Tires website. They totally outsource that. But in order for the aftermarket to embrace that, they need to be engaging in on those channels. So the inventory needs to be on there. I think in the not too far distant future, we will see services and purchasing items merge into one. And it's only the technology that's the barrier of that and utilizing a common platform. But I've seen trials of that changing, and in the last 10 years, we're getting closer and closer. And I'm seeing that in the US happening quite a lot. And then one other final point I want to make, it's managing the car, as Julia said. You know, I worked on an interesting project with a fastback player in Thailand, where they put OB2 connectors in a fleet of 10,000 taxis, and they could predict when the consumables need to be changed, when it needs to be a service, and they could then plan for that, but also increase the amount of sales they got once they got those that fleet into the workshop as well. And I can just see that just happening even more. You're seeing you're seeing the vehicle dealers already do that with the connected car. There's no doubt about that. And the aftermarket really needs to embrace that for sure. But there are people out there to actually advise. The SMMT is a great resource. You know, we're here to actually help consult and give advice. I think the biggest thing is knowledge, and without having knowledge and understanding all the options, then you can't make an informed decision. And the people all on this panel can actually help with that.
No, excellent. And Peter, we've heard really some fantastic insight today, and I think for me a lot of it does actually tell me that digital can really complement bricks and mortar, and that will obviously be very traditional businesses looking to embrace digital. So from what you've heard, from what you know, what should be those first steps for businesses that really want to sort of begin their digital journey?
Well, I think dialogue is probably the most important thing there. I think there may be a fear of concentration of data or information, either within the market or between players in the market. So within the aftermarket, within the independent aftermarket, I think recognizing it's competitive, but there's a level of collaboration that's needed. So talk, you know, business to business, or talk as a sector, you know, at meetings at SMMT, for instance. And we've also recently launched a safe harbor program. If there are more critical discussions there about supply or business relationships that would normally not be favorably looked at by Competition and Markets Authority, but are necessary to keep things afloat. And there is a recognition there that we live in exceptional times, not just because of COVID, but also because the V word is around us all every day. So those discussions are important, and I think also talking about how we maintain access to data. It's not 2 wires and a light bulb anymore. Cars are incredibly complex, so it's ensuring that the aftermarket still has fair access to a vehicle, you know, contemporaneous and unmonitored access to vehicle data, whether that's the data from the vehicle itself or user data. So general data protection regulation comes in there. So does block exemption review about the relationship between all of the players, the vehicle manufacturers, their franchises, independent factors and workshops. And at the end of the day, that's about preserving competition for the consumer. So I think it's talking about all of those things and cybersecurity to make sure that the markets aren't skewed, that we keep on as level a playing field as possible. So there's work to do together within the aftermarket to ensure that, and that comes from talking.
Yeah, and talking and asking questions, and I think that's a good real place to start. So thank you everybody for your fantastic insight. I want to quickly move on to questions, and I won't start with any easy questions. I have an audience question. How do we ensure ourselves against a second or third COVID wave? Well,
so our aftermarket guidance that we did with a number of other trade associations, the IAAF, the GEA, the SMTA, the Garage Equipment Association, is there. I think one thing that we're very, very keen on is clear messaging from government. You know, every measure that seems to have come has been, well, this is perfectly simple, but that perfectly simple sort of advice or requirement very quickly leads on to a dozen or more very nuanced questions about what it actually means. You know, there was confusion in April and May about who could remain open. We had to write to Alok Sharma, Secretary of State for Business, to get a letter of comfort saying, if you can't work from home, you can still go to work. And, you know, police were stopping people on the way to workshops to get their cars MOT'd. So avoiding that, learning from those mistakes, I think that's a critical thing. And I think it would seem rather impossible to be less prepared than we were at the outset. So I hope learning those lessons will stand everyone in good stead.
Julia, Andrew, anything you'd like to add on that?
I think just to add what Peter said is that we have learned a lot over the last 6 months, and we're doing business in different ways. We are talking more on these sort of things. You know, I've done a few webinars, and I've never had as much of attendance as we have this year as we did last year. So we've had more time to actually think about our business as well. And I think it's spreading risk and making sure that you're not just doing one thing, but you're spreading that into different channels. And that's kind of, I think, what this webinar is about. It's embracing other ways of doing business.
Yeah, I would agree. And sharing information, I think we mentioned that earlier. It's about sharing information, sharing experiences and best practices, and finding sensible ways of doing business, because it's not just protecting ourselves against the second or third wave of COVID. It's protecting, as we see here, the aftermarket and the functioning of the aftermarket, and keeping our cars on the road in a safe way. So Peter was mentioning the MOT. So I mean, on the one hand, we were probably all glad that there was the possibility of delaying MOT. On the other hand, we already know how many cars potentially would fail the MOT. So by delaying the MOT any further, the risks of having cars that are not street safe has increased, and from an economic point of view, it has delayed revenues in the aftermarket that are very, very important. So again, it's I think doing business in a safe and sensible way that will help us getting through COVID.
No, excellent, some really excellent points, and I do think businesses in the industry have gone to enormous lengths to protect themselves and their employees and also customers. We have quite a high number of questions, so I'll move on. Another question from the audience: when we think about digitalisation, do we see the route to market to independent workshops changing? And this is in a traditional sense from supplier back to garage.
So the route to market for a workshop, absolutely. Sorry, Julia. And the route to market for a factor to the workshop, yes, absolutely.
I mean, one is obviously the service industry that we touched upon, and the other one is really the parts business as well, because parts business can be delivered directly through the garages by do-it-for-me models. So the route to markets are actually increasing, and the options are increasing for the direct customer, for the B2C, and also for the B2B businesses. So yes, for sure.
I think also it's actually changing on where you make your profit, your margin. So you may not necessarily sell the parts that's sold somewhere else, but you're actually producing footfall into your establishments. But you've then got the opportunity to then sell add-on services to that customer. And I'll give you a quick example of that. In another industry, Argos was actually dying around about 10 years ago, and then they did a deal with eBay where they did click and collect, and they increased their footfall by around about 400,000 because of that. Because Argos stores are out, are out of town. It's convenient to get things delivered there. They're open till late. So they pivoted their model, and we've just got to think different ways of doing things.
I think that's a great point. I was listening to a podcast over the weekend, and they were talking about almost the reinvention of retail and having more experience-led stores. And businesses, so I expect to see more Genius bars set up and more things like that. Just another question, if I can.
Where you can't get an appointment at another Genius bar, where you're going to wait for months.
You own the same type of computer as I do, then. So another question: is there a danger with the online booking companies that they will encourage a race to the bottom on prices and therefore quality? And I think, Andrew, actually you did touch on that, and it is about offering value, a valued proposition.
So in the European Union, competition is a great thing. It's also something in the aftermarket we have to deal with. There's no doubt about that. And there is that risk, but it's that value triangle, isn't it? People buy because of price, quality, and availability. Yeah, and price is important, but it's not the be all and end all. Particularly when you're looking at different things such as performance parts, for example, people will go for branded items, not necessarily for the cheap white labeled items. So you've got to kind of embrace that. Yes, it is. You look at the energy industry when that was opened up. Yeah, it was more competitive, and there was better pricing out there. But you've just got to look past that. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, if I may add to it, so I've heard also this race to the bottom story and when we look at sales of vehicles, of new vehicles, and people screaming because of car wow. I think we need to realize that at a certain extent, these platforms actually fill a need gap from the customer. So it could be seen also a channel to market for market participants who don't necessarily have the appetite or the finances to build up an online presence. So using these aggregators to a certain extent can actually help also smaller garages that are not on the high street, that don't have a big brand name offering their services. And believe me, I tried it out as well. I might actually be happy to pay a little bit more to have convenience. So to have a garage picking up my vehicle rather than me dropping it, picking it up at my offices, or actually, as Andrew suggested, offering certain parts or ensuring that the staff is trained by a certain company within the ecosystem. So I don't think it's a race to the bottom. I think it's filling a needs gap and creating additional channels for the aftermarket.
Yeah,
Can I just
I've got to say that's
one. Sorry, go on. I was just going to add one quick point. You know, Just Eat, Deliveroo, have we stopped doing buying takeaways because of those two? We've just actually increased that with those different. It's facilitated and increased traffic with those, and I think that's what we've got to embrace. Sorry, Peter, I interrupted you.
No, not at all, Andrew. I think you're absolutely right, and so Julia, I think those platforms give an entry point to thousands of workshops that might struggle otherwise, and workshops should not sell themselves short. As Julia says, people are willing to pay for convenience. That collection and delivery service, fantastic. Get your car picked up, dropped off, job done. Don't have to go anywhere, don't have to go to a workshop. Lovely their workshops are. Yeah, don't sell yourself short. Realise that people are willing to pay for that. There was some research, I can't remember the figure, but it was a good proportion of the consumers, end users, motorists coming forward now are willing to pay more.
Okay, fantastic. I think I'm going to squeeze one question in, even though perhaps we're almost close to running out of time. The automotive aftermarket sector is behind most others with embracing digital technology. Hopefully today we've moved that a bit further forward. Do you think that independent workshops will be willing and able to adapt this new technology, smartphone technology, before it's too late?
I would very much hope so, with the assistance of the platforms and the support mechanisms that exist that are in place. Absolutely. I think if you don't, you're at risk of becoming a bit of an anachronism, that you won't be keeping pace with change. And I've seen lots of businesses invest in that and realize a return. So I think that's the important thing to remember, is that it will preserve your business. I suppose over the last 22 years, there's always a proportion of aftermarket businesses that don't want to invest, and if they're sort of family owned, people are coming to retirement age, then maybe they don't want to. But I think if you want to keep in the game, you've got to make that investment.
I think it's timing, and the timing is right now. It's not because the technology's not there. The technology's been used in other verticals. There's no doubt about that. It's not because there's a fear of using things such as smartphones. I went for my grandmother. I tried to buy one of these old Nokia phones last week. Couldn't find one actually without a smartphone. Everyone's got a smartphone, so they know how to use that. It's just now embracing it. That's where we're left with now.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Sadly, we have run out of time. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for giving up your time to be with us. Special thanks to our speakers for giving up their time to share their experiences and their views. Some fantastic insight that they've shared with everybody. A massive thank you to ecommotors for sponsoring the Messe Frankfurt UK Aftermarket webinar series. The next webinar is scheduled for early December, and we shall obviously inform you of an exact date, but do keep an eye out for that announcement. And on the back of today's success, I'm sure there will be plenty of valuable discussion points to pick up on. We'll be sending a short survey out as well, if you don't mind spending a bit of time just filling in some comments and feedback, so we can help shape these webinars for all your future needs. And any suggestions or topics you would like us to tackle. We're very keen to make sure that we are meeting your demand and expectation for good content. Today's webinar was recorded and will be hosted on the Automechanica Birmingham website. If you found today useful, please do let your colleagues know about it. That concludes the webinar for today, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, guys. Thanks,
Thank
Julia.
you.
Peter. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.